Good afternoon. My name is James Cleathan, and I am the Manager of Advancement Operations at LLS. Welcome to LLS Research Now, exciting progress from the LLS Dare to Dream project. Before we get started today, a few housekeeping items. Please note that this call is being recorded. We'll send a link to the recording to all of you after the call. All participants' audio and video is currently disabled in order to cut down on background noise. There will be a Q&A portion at the end of today's panel. You can ask questions during that time by typing into the Q&A feature. On your computer, you'll find the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. On a phone or tablet, tap the More button at the bottom of the screen on the right side, then hit Q&A. That takes care of the housekeeping items. Now, I'd like to turn it over to our host for today's call, past LLS President and Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Luis J. DeGennaro.
Thank you, James. Hello, everyone. Dr. Lou DeGennaro here now, as James said, past president and CEO of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I'm here to welcome all of you to a very special edition of LLS Research Now, our series about the impact of LLS-funded research and how your support makes it possible. Today, you're going to hear about the exciting progress we're making with Dare to Dream, the Dare to Dream project, which will revolutionize the standard of treatment and care for children with pediatric blood cancer through research, advocacy, and patient support. This call is of particular importance to me as it's one of the final opportunities I have to thank all of you for your compassion and dedication to blood cancer patients and their families. As you may know, I'm officially retiring on June 30, and in fact, have already handed the reins over to my successor, Dr. Andy Kolb, and have stepped back into an advisory role, and that happened on May 1st. It's been, truly an honor to serve LLS and partner with all of you in the growth of this organization over the last 18 years. I feel so incredibly proud of what we've accomplished together. Many of you have been with us every step of the way since we began this endeavor as the Children's Initiative 5 years ago. Since that time, we've entered into partnerships with individuals and organizations around the globe to join us in our remarkable endeavor to help as many children as possible. With the rebrand launched a year ago of the bigger, bolder Dare to Dream project, we're stretching our goals, increasing our efforts, and reaching more families for a deeper impact as we change the paradigm for pediatric cancer research and treatment. You've heard both me and Dr. Nichols say this many times before. Children are not just little adults. They need new and better therapies that are less toxic, so that they can not only survive, but thrive after their treatment. Because kids are different and need to be treated differently, the Dare to Dream project is funding groundbreaking research as well as expanding LLS support services and driving advocacy efforts to help kids with blood cancers get accessible, affordable, quality care. At the heart of Dare to Dream is LLS PEDAL, a global collaborative pediatric acute leukemia master clinical trial designed to accelerate the development of new treatments for acute leukemia in children. Dr. Nichols will be giving you an update on PEDAL in just a moment, but before I turn the call over to Dr. Nichols, I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. E. Anders Kolb, LLS's new president and CEO, who has, you should know, been the co-chair of PEDAL since the planning began in 2018 and has played a pivotal role in developing and launching this master clinical trial. A world-renowned pediatric oncologist, hematologist, oncologist, Dr. Kolb has dedicated his career to treating blood cancer patients and conducting research to find cures. He has served as in a volunteer capacity for LLS for over 15 years, and I have no doubt that he's going to lead LLS in a continued trajectory of growth and success. And now I'm delighted to introduce to you Dr. Andy Kolb.
Thank you, Dr. Liu, and thank you all for being here today. It's an honor to be on this call with all of you, my friends, my colleagues, and you are all changing the future for our children and for our youngest patients. So I want to start by thanking all of you for being here today. Your continued support, encouragement, and participation in the LLS mission is deeply, deeply appreciated. You make everything we do at LLS possible. I'm so thankful for your commitment to LLS and for your compassion for blood cancer patients and their families. It is my privilege to lead this world-changing organization and to build on the amazing legacy of Dr. Liu, who spent the last 18 years at LLS driving change as an innovator and inspiration to the science and the healthcare industry. I felt so fortunate to have his guidance and counsel over the last few months, and I feel very prepared to take on this new role. He will certainly be missed, but he tells me he's not going very far. So I look forward to continuing to take advantage of his wisdom for many years to come. As a clinician scientist, I've dedicated much of my personal and professional life to fighting blood cancers, and I have been amazed by the number of groundbreaking targeted therapies that have been developed over the past several years under Dr. Liu's tenure and with your support and the support of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Personally, for as long as I can remember, I've wanted to be a doctor. I specialized in pediatric hematology oncology because its complexity offered the perfect mix of science and mission and afforded me the opportunity to help families in crisis. After 21 years of research and clinical practice, I'm honored and humbled to be here with you today as President and CEO of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And for me, this is particularly an exciting time to join LLS because Dare to Dream and PEDAL are taking off to change the future of care for children. It has been the highlight of my academic work to walk arm in arm with Gwen and the PEDAL team as we conceptualize and develop this paradigm-changing approach to pediatric cancer research. With your support, together we are fundamentally going to change how children with blood cancer are treated. Together we will build on the success that LLS has had in advancing therapies and progress for blood cancer patients and bring newer and safer treatments to pediatric patients around the world. I look forward to growing new initiatives that are responsive to the needs of our patients and our communities. But you are all the engine behind everything that we do. You enable LLS and the investigators that it supports to be innovative and to be forward-thinking. I'm proud to have all of you by my side as we continue to make progress in research, advocacy, and patient support. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Gwen Nichols to share some of the exciting updates on Dare to Dream, on the Dare to Dream project, as well as PEDAL.
Well, thank you so much, Andy, and hello, everyone. As you've heard, I'm Gwen Nichols. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at LLS, and I'm happy to be here to tell you about all the good work that your support of LLS has made possible, especially in this last year. It's been a really busy and eventful year. I think that's an understatement. As Andy mentioned, we will spend some time talking about the pediatric acute leukemia trial, which activated in April last year. But before I get to that and introduce our special guest, I want to share a few truly wonderful updates. In May, we had the opportunity to celebrate the awarding of 105 scholarships to really exceptional applicants from all across the country in our second class of awardees for the LLS Scholarship for Blood Cancer Survivors. We were able also, thanks to your support, to renew all the eligible scholarships for the previous year, so that everyone who had received a scholarship gets another year if they're continuing in school. Our aim is to give survivors of pediatric blood cancer, regardless of when their treatment was and when their education got held up, the financial support they need to pursue their scholastic goals. It's really an inspirational program, and whether you supported it directly or through LLS overall, or even if you supported another program, your involvement with LLS makes programs like this happen. Also notable in the past year was a major win for pediatric patients with the 5-year extension of the Childhood Cancer Survivorship Treatment Access and Research Act. Fortunately, it has an acronym called the STAR Act. It is the most comprehensive childhood cancer bill ever passed by Congress. We played a role in helping fashion it, and it's a game changer for pediatric patients to continue support and progress for years to come. As important as medical advances are to helping children fight blood cancer, they're only a portion of what we need to do to be sure that the incredible scientific advances that LLS supports actually get to the patients who need them. At LLS, we're really committed to providing 360-degree support for pediatric patients and their families. To that end, over the last year, we have increased the number of pediatric nurses who act as nurse navigators for our clinical trial support center. This is a center free to all to help blood cancer families navigate the clinical trial process. This means to help them enroll in PEDAL, to help them find other trials that are appropriate for them. It is an incredible service, and our nurses are really spectacular. We also have Pearl Point Nutrition Services, and they've recently developed nutrition videos for patients, parents, and caregivers to help maintain healthy eating during treatment and survivorship. Many, many patients find this difficult, and these videos and free nutrition support are part of Dare to Dream. These are just a few of the many ways we're taking action to help young patients and their families cope with the impact of pediatric blood cancer. And again, they're all free of charge and made possible by your support. And now, before I bring on our guests, I want to give you a quick update on PEDAL. PEDAL is a global clinical trial, which we know, when fully realized, will take place in more than a dozen countries and in more than 400 hospitals around the world. Through PEDAL, we'll test numerous therapies simultaneously so that children who enter into the trial are given a therapeutic option that is most targeted to their tumor. PEDAL is split into multiple different arms, and we are actively increasing those arms right now. It begins with a screening trial, and I think that it's important to understand the screening trial provides access to sequencing and biomarker testing that is not available to all children. And with this, we're able to identify unique aspects of the tumor biology for the individual child and make that available to their physician so that they can look and find the most promising treatment, not just continue with one-size-fits-all therapy. Parallel to the screening trial, we have therapeutic trials that will test numerous targeted treatment options so that under this clinical trial umbrella, researchers can investigate more than one drug at a time to see how well they work in treating relapsed acute leukemia. As an update, in the screening trial, we now have 168 sites open and 113 patients enrolled, including the US, of course, but Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Our first clinical trial is studying the drug venetoclax. It opened last year as well, and to date, we have 31 sites open with 8 patients enrolled and a 9th patient currently in screening. Over the next 4 years, we expect the venetoclax trial to open at 88 sites globally and enroll 98 patients. It's an audacious goal to do a big trial like this in pediatrics internationally. With that said, I'm proud to report that having 8 patients enrolled in our first drug trial at the 10-month mark puts us ahead of schedule for enrollment. And it's thanks to the relationships LLS has built and the commitment of the pediatric community to make PETAL successful. And looking ahead, we are in the process of contract negotiations to have additional subpopulations of AML and ALL, and we are expanding our screening trial to certain patients with acute lymphoblastic leukemia as well, ones that are not already being served by clinical trials. So we are all very excited about that. And now to talk about PETAL and its impact, I'm really delighted to have you meet one of the really wonderful physician scientists partnering with us with LLS on PETAL. Dr. Seth Carroll is a physician scientist at St. Jude's, and he was recently one of the 3 researchers identified as a leader in pediatric blood cancers and named a Lisa Dean Mosley Fellow and an LLS PETAL Principal Investigator. His work is receiving vital support from the Mosley Foundation, which is interested in efforts that provide early career scientists expanded opportunities for clinical trial research. And I really want to talk to Seth about that, and that's why I'm thrilled he's here. But first, I just want to do a special shout out to the Lisa Dean Mosley Foundation for the grant to establish this fellowship program. It's innovative. It provides a fresh vision for advancing science and serving patients and allowing people to continue the good work through PETAL and through doing clinical trials for pediatric patients. So now we're going to chat with Seth, and we'll bring back Dr. Kolb because he's been part of this as well in a few minutes. But Seth, I want to start hearing in your words. I think people have heard me talk about some of the challenges in pediatric research, but I think we want to hear it from you. What are the challenges and how is PETAL addressing that?
Thank you, Gwen, for that really lovely introduction. And before I answer the question, I just want to also extend my thanks to the Mosley Foundation. As you said, their support has just been invaluable as we work through this process. And I'm really very grateful to be a recipient of the fellowship. So we are blessed that children's cancer is a relatively rare problem, and therefore we sort of centralize care for children with cancer in big children's hospitals, but they are relatively small by adult oncology perspectives. And what that means is that there are real challenges in getting enough oxygen in the room to get attention from stakeholders in industry or elsewhere to really make sure that drugs reach our patients. And that's particularly hard at relapse because relapse in childhood leukemia is even more rare than it is in adult cancers. And so you've got a small population to begin with, and then gratefully only some of them relapse. And so you start to get very small numbers of patients, and it can be very hard to coordinate at a national or international level all of these patients across these hundreds of different centers to get them onto trials that really offer them the right therapy. And that's a problem both for the patient, because then the patient isn't getting the drug they need, but it's really a problem for the community and for future patients, because unless we can test these drugs in the right patients, we can't understand whether they're going to work well in children like they might in adults. And as you already said beautifully, children are not little adults. Not only are they just smaller and a whole lot cuter and just more fun to work with, but the biology of cancer in children is very different than the biology of cancer in adults. And the chemotherapy that we give routinely to children would often be too toxic for adults to use. And so we can't just take adult data and plug it into kids and expect to get the same outcomes. We really need to test these drugs in children well. And a big initiative like this that helps us connect these patients across all these sites is absolutely critical.
Well, thank you. And I couldn't agree more. I want to go back to the Lisa Dean Mosley Fellowship, because look, Seth, you are already a clinical investigator. In fact, the trial that that you are the principal investigator for in PEDAL, you did the initial trials at St. Jude's to tell us that this was something we needed to continue to test. So you are not a novice by any stretch of the imagination. So why are you getting, why is the Lisa Dean Mosley Fellowship helpful to you? Why do you accept this, and what does it mean? I think people should understand this a little bit better, because we get it, but we're in the biz.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So I mean, I've been very fortunate to have some nice successes early in my career, like the trial that you mentioned. But I am still early in my career. And when you're early in your career, you're busy with a lot of different things. I spend a lot of time taking care of patients. We've got very sick patients that I'm grateful to be a part of their care. But to do research well, you also need time to sit and focus on the research. And so I am involved in this and several other research projects, and they all struggle to take up the hours of my day. And so I'm so thankful that I have the Mosley Foundation support to really carve out parts of my day to just focus on this project and really make sure that I am applying all the research knowledge that I've learned from prior trials and from other places to make sure that we make this trial work as well as we can for the patients. And then, as you've hinted at, PEDAL is really a global initiative. And so I have fantastic collaborators and colleagues in Europe that I need to coordinate with. And that is, it can be a bit tricky because the time differences are not always straightforward. And so being able to really carve out time to ensure that I'm available when they're available, that we can talk, coordinate, and keep this trial running really well has been very, very needed and very helpful.
Well, I want to talk, I think that's great. And I want to talk about the venetoclax trial, because it's the first trial. It's the, I'd like people to understand the process a bit. And you talked about your colleagues in Europe. I'd love you to go into a little bit more detail about the harmonization process and what needs to happen to be sure that, a trial at St. Jude's is the same as a trial in Dusseldorf.
Yeah, it's a perfect question. And it's one that I have been so happy to have such wonderful mentorship from Andy and others to learn this process. As you mentioned, our prior trial was primarily a St. Jude trial, and the other sites that were involved were here in the United States. And so to do a trial at a truly national and especially an international level was a whole nother step in my development as an investigator, and to have the expertise of Andy and others, and then Andy's counterparts across the Atlantic, to really help us figure out how to harmonize this. And what we think of as our standard treatments here in the United States do not always perfectly match what they use as standard treatments in France or in Germany or in the Netherlands or elsewhere in Europe or the world. And so a huge amount of that work was on the front end, where we sat on many calls on Zoom or other of these technologies and really hashed out together what we thought was the right treatment that we could all agree on as our standard treatment, and make sure that we thought that was going to be safe in combination with the venetoclax, so that when we added one more thing to it, that we were still giving patients really excellent care and excellent medicine. And then the other piece that I've learned right along the way, and I know my European colleagues were aware of this already, and that's why it's been so fantastic to work with them, is that we had our harmonized plan, and that plan worked well in the first few countries that we started in Europe. But then as we expanded out to the rest of the continent, there were other regulators in those places that had different ideas about what we absolutely needed. And so we are now reharmonizing again and again each time we work with a new country and make these little tweaks that don't change anything significant, but certainly we dot our I's and cross our T's in slightly different ways or with different cursive letters as we move to different countries.
Well, I think that, thank you, because I know that this is a labor of love, and you know, I'm sure there were days when you said this would have been easier to just do by ourselves, and I'm sure our colleagues in Europe felt the same way. But I really do believe as we learn more and we come up with these ways to harmonize, that'll be learning we can use for the future. For the next trial and the next trial, and it can be used in trials that aren't even for pediatric blood cancer. So I'm really hopeful that this is practice changing, and we see the path forward for more international trials. I want to just spend one more minute talking about the screening trial, because look, a place like St. Jude's has top-notch sequencing and all kinds of biomarkers available for the patients that you see. Why do we need to do a screening trial under these circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. You're right. We are very blessed here to have a lot of resources that enable us to do things like those tests on our patients. But as I said at the beginning, these patients are not just here in Memphis. They are spread out all across the country. There are hundreds of sites just around the US and Canada, and then we add several dozen more as we get into Europe. And many of those sites do not have access to the same level of screening. And in the world that we are in now, so many of our therapies are really targeted to specific genetic changes in the leukemia. And those therapies, we know from both the adults and from the lab data that those therapies do nothing in a child who doesn't have, or a patient that doesn't have the right combination of genes in their leukemia. And there are too many of those for me to, and kids just get too sick to go through and try each one of them in sequence on a patient before you strike on the right one. And so we really need to know which patients are appropriate to test with which medicines right from the beginning. And that lets us give these patients the very best care, and also lets us really understand whether these medicines, which look promising in older people, can be just as promising in our little ones. And really, without that testing, we wouldn't know, we would be choosing blind, and that's really not acceptable in the world we live in.
Well, I thank you for that, because I couldn't agree more. And I think we, those of us who were fortunate enough to have access to all of the things that we need sometimes forget that that's not the norm. And so I appreciate everything that you're doing, and that you, as a representative of St. Jude's, are part of this bigger picture with us. So thank you. And now I want to bring back Andy. Dr. Kolb, please, if you would, put your video on so I can ask you a few questions. Now he might get nervous.
All right.
I'm not going to ask if you'll raise my salary or anything else, so don't worry. I think people want to know, you know, because they've heard that you and I were co-chairs of PEDAL, and we've been talking about PEDAL, and now you're taking over to be the CEO of LLS. How is your role in PEDAL changed? And, you know, what am I going to do? So
well,
please
yeah,
tell.
yeah. I mean, it's a great question. So, PEDAL's the reason that I'm here. It's what got me connected, really connected to LLS, and understand the talent and the potential of the organization, and continuing to support pediatric cancer research is critical to me, and I know it's critical to LLS because they hired me. So being the chief executive officer also means I'm the chief supporter of PEDAL and Dare to Dream. But it also gives me an opportunity to extend my reach and impact, and on the philanthropy side and engage more donors. I mean, we need to make sure that we hit our fundraising goals, that we can do everything that we need to do. I think, Gwen, we've been walking this walk for 5 years now, and the only, I think the standard along the way, the only thing that we can consistently rely on is the fact that this is really hard to do. And I'm sure our budgets are not quite right yet, as we have not identified all the many problems that we're going to run into. And so we need to keep fighting to support this work. It is so critical, not just for kids with blood cancers, but I think working out the processes that make global collaboration and drug approvals for children possible. Working out those processes will benefit all kids with cancer.
Tell the group assembled here a little bit about the trial design, a little bit more about why it's global, why it's multi-drug, and what you see as the important aspects of that.
Yeah, so I think in the past, the questions that we were asking as clinician scientists for children with cancer, they were based on standard therapies, commercially available drugs that are off patent and relatively inexpensive. We were reshuffling the deck to see if we could alter doses and improve outcomes. Certainly in the last 5 years, maybe in the last 10 to 15 years, we've started asking questions about drugs that are not as available, maybe available only through one company or two companies, and are quite expensive. And there are times when I think we have done inadvertently done harm. We've asked academic questions in Europe and shown that a drug can provide benefit, and then it's not available in the US. Or we've asked academic questions in the US, shown that a drug can provide benefit, and it's not available in Europe or even sometimes in Canada. And as drugs are getting more effective and more expensive, we need to make sure that we are working with pharmaceutical companies, with our regulators, and with the academic community to not just give kids access to drugs in that clinical trial, but to give them access to drugs in perpetuity through the approval process, through the regulatory approval process. This isn't something that has been a priority in the academic community in the past because it hasn't needed to be. We haven't had access to these drugs. Now that we do, which is great, we need to get our acts together so that we can make sure that kids have access to therapies through regulatory approvals in perpetuity, and that there are no barriers to getting that. Parents shouldn't be having to negotiate with their insurance companies to get access to a drug that their physician thinks isn't going to be effective, right? We need that to be easy, so we need to ask the right questions and do so with in lockstep with our pharmaceutical companies and regulatory agencies.
Well, as you know, I believe in that wholeheartedly, and that the process to get drugs in rare diseases approved, and thankfully pediatric acute leukemia are rare diseases, is an arduous process because we don't usually get enough patients on a trial. And so I think the cooperation we've seen, the recognition amongst pediatric hematologists, oncologists, that this needs to change, I think we're at the right place at the right time, and very excited that we're making progress. But it isn't easy, as we've said. You've heard from Dr. Carroll and Dr. Kolb. The process is an arduous one, but we are bound and determined to keep plugging away at this, because I really do believe it will be easier in the future if we keep barreling forward to make this a reality.
Yeah.
I think there are people on the call who are big supporters of LLS's research agenda. And as you know, as part of Dare to Dream, we have expanded our pediatric specific research, both basic research and translational research dramatically, so that there are, we have gone from some years a lot of funding, some years a little funding, to really set amounts of pediatric research funding every year, thanks to the people on this call. I guess people would like to know how the target identification and the science that we're doing, that's underway, gets incorporated into PEDAL. How do we move from things that are in a research paper to becoming part of PEDAL? Talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, you had mentioned the screening trial before, and that has enrolled more than 100 kids. I think more than 120 kids right now. It's open at many centers across the country, and we've enrolled more patients in the first year of that screening trial than we have in the past 8 years of relapsed AML studies through the Children's Oncology Group, right? So that allows us to do a couple things. We are using the same flow cytometry and sequencing platforms on newly diagnosed patients as we are at relapse through the Children's Oncology Group. And we are getting serial samples on kids after they relapse. So if their therapy, so we know what their leukemia looked like when they were diagnosed. We know what it looked like when they relapsed. Now we're going to know what it looks like if, God forbid, it comes back again or it doesn't respond to treatment. So we're going to be able to track changes in the leukemia cells that may identify reasons for resistance or identify new vulnerabilities in those leukemia cells. And it's those vulnerabilities and those changes in the cells that give us an idea of what those therapy targets may be. So that's the screening trial. But then for the sub-trials, we're really focusing on making sure that we have something for everyone, and that's what the venetoclax is, but then also making sure that we have effective therapies where there is a target. And there are 2 trials that we hope to open this year that are targeting a mutation that's seen in about a quarter of the kids with leukemia. And that's just through, as I mentioned, partnering with the drug companies. These are companies that have been engaged with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society before, and now we're able to leverage that engagement and make sure that they meet their pediatric requirements early in drug development, right? We don't want to do this 5 years from now. We want to do this as soon as we know they have a viable drug, and as soon as we know it's a drug that's going to be of benefit to kids. So I think that's the power of this initiative, is that there's no other show in town that can deliver the number of patients, the number of investigators like Seth, and the infrastructure to pull off studies like that. So we've got the kids at diagnosis, we've got them at relapse, and we've got the pharmaceutical companies lined up that have the effective therapies.
So one last question. What's next for PEDAL?
I think we need more drugs. We continue to work with with the pharmaceutical companies to bring the effective therapies forward. And there are a lot of delays in the system. I come from the NCI academic infrastructure, funded infrastructure, and I'll take my licks. I know there's a lot of inefficiencies and delays in there, but there's a lot of inefficiencies and delays on the pharmaceutical side too, as they, especially for smaller companies that are dealing with their own funding limitations and deprioritizing pediatrics because they just don't have the money to do it, right? We need to keep working with these companies, find a way to deliver eligible patients and study eligible patients as quickly and as inexpensively and as efficiently as possible. So what's next for PEDAL is to build off of all of the great work that Seth did in developing a global clinical trial, and how to copy that and move that forward multiple times as efficiently as possible. And then to start learning from all of the samples that patients have donated to us, all the bone marrow that they have given us to study. There's tremendous responsibility in managing those specimens and doing it well and making sure that we learn from it. And we've got all the right investigators around the world helping us with that. And I think the last thing that's next, you've heard me share this story many times, and I think Seth was in the room too, at the American Society of Hematology meeting this last December. We talked about expanding the Venetoclax trial, Seth's trial, to Japan, and the Japanese investigator cried almost inconsolably, saying that they never get to see drugs early in development. They never get access to these trials for children in Japan. And I think PEDAL needs to continue to go big, go global. It's going to be hard to open a trial in Japan, but we need to do it.
But we need to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to invite all the panelists to come back on and unmute, if you would. Lou, I think I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you very much, Seth. Andy, thanks so much for participating in this. We're going to open it up to questions now. I want to remind people that they can simply type a question into the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, or if you're on a phone or a tablet, to tap the More button at the bottom of the screen and then Q&A and put your questions in. We're happy to entertain, the panel is happy to entertain your questions. While people are getting up and going on that, I've got a question. I'm not sure who exactly it goes to, perhaps a bit from all of you, but Andy, you started mentioning the data that's being collected, genomic data, and underpinning all of these efforts is a major database effort as well, where I know we've been collecting historical data for comparison, and now of course the data going forward. And I think it would be valuable to say a word or two about how that's being done and what the potential of it is for physicians and patients in the future. So I don't know, Gwen, you want to start that one, or Andy?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
This is something we've been working on for a long time, and I love the question, Lou. Thank you. There's a lot of power in data. There's a lot of information in data sets that will inform what we do in the future and inform how we run trials. The problem is that a lot of those data sit in siloed environments. They sit on a server at an institution or a cooperative group, or and they're not integrated. And then you want to layer on top of that not just the patient data and the outcome data, but the sequencing data, for example, to try and identify things that predict specific outcomes. And pulling all of that together is a lot of work. So we've been working with Sam Bolchenbaum at the University of Chicago, who is a data scientist. He's a pediatric oncologist who loves data and has a team of scientists dedicated to understanding data. And we've been working with him for years now. And Gwen and Seth talked about this previously, the idea of harmonization, to know that what we're calling relapse or remission in Memphis is what they call relapse and remission in Dusseldorf or Japan or Australia or wherever. And if it isn't, if the definitions are different, to understand what those differences are and be able to pull everything together in one system that everybody in the world has access to, and people can use it to ask questions. And that is the foundation of our screening trial. Everything goes into this data set from the beginning, but it's also what we're doing looking backwards. So going back 10, 15 years in cooperative groups around the world, to have them submit all of their data to the University of Chicago have everything harmonized around the same definitions. And it's really going to be, a transformative effort.
And I'll just add that it's really critical that, you know, we have data from Japan, data from Germany, data from St. Jude's, data from the Children's Oncology Group.
Yep.
All of this together gives so much more power than any one of these incredible, you know, groups or institutions can do by themselves. And the fact that people see that and are willing to hand over their precious data to be part of a bigger effort is, well, it's really gratifying for me, because I fashioned this in my mind, but I wasn't sure we'd be able to talk people into it. And I give a lot of credit to the team.
Thank you both. There was a question about whether the trial is just for AML, and Dr. Carroll answered it, but I'm gonna reframe it and ask it in sort of a different way, and that is, you know, based on your experience and your expertise, while of course, because we're the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, we're focused on a blood cancer, do you see the potential in the mechanisms being put in place for this trial to ultimately down the road be utilized in clinical trials for other forms of pediatric cancer?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sam.
Sir.
I think Andy hinted at it really beautifully in his response, which is that I think a lot of what we are learning in the current trial, we are learning because it's the first trial that we have done as a group. And we are sort of finding all of those pain points as we work across international boundaries and work with different regulatory agencies to identify these things. And I think 90% of those lessons are going to be true for the next trial in AML, and they're going to be true for the trials in ALL when they come down the pipe in the future months. And so I think that it is not just that the collaborations that we are building with all of these people is going to be incredibly valuable to all these patients into future trials. It's really the lessons that we are learning as investigators to navigate the frameworks, the regulatory landscape, et cetera, that will be so valuable to move future trials forward even faster.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, I think the whole, starting with the Beat AML trial, which Lou has every reason to be incredibly proud of having initiated. I've spent a huge amount of time talking to other foundations, to other academic groups about the power of collaboration in the clinical trial effort. And I believe that this goes well beyond pediatrics to be a way in all kinds of rare disease. It may go beyond oncology. I am spending, because I'm an oncologist, my time talking to oncology groups, but I'm talking to brain cancer groups and pancreatic cancer groups, and telling them what I can about how, what we're learning and how we built this. I think that there's a lot that is transferable, not only to other pediatric blood cancers, to other pediatric cancers, to other cancers, but maybe even beyond cancer. And I feel, this isn't the perfect system, but we're learning and we're perfecting, and we hope others will take it and move it into their areas of need and perfect it and learn and advance from where we are right now.
And though I just add, just to highlight something that Seth said, in 10 years, when we look back on the successes of PEDAL, God willing, we will have identified some very effective therapies, but I think we will have also trained a generation of clinician scientists who understand that global collaboration is not only possible, but necessary. And that's different than the world I grew up in. And I think that will drive progress and change for many years to come.
Andy, thank you. I can't think of a better outcome for an initiative driven by the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I want to pivot for a minute, and again, I'm not sure who wants to field this question, but there's a question about fundraising. So can you talk more about the fundraising goals and where we are in the process of meeting those goals?
Give that one to Gwen or Seth if you want it, but I'll give it to Gwen.
Well, we are well underway, but because last year it took what I came up with in a my non-marketing background, doctor speak, the Children's Initiative. The right people got it and said this needs to be Dare to Dream, and with Dare to Dream, while it is a name change and we have some nice slide backgrounds, there's much more to it than that, and it is an expansion of what I had originally planned. Now 5 or 6 years ago, and our goal is $175 million over the next 5 years, and we are partway there, but we still have a substantial amount to fundraise. And so we are working tirelessly on that effort. And, thank everyone who has contributed to this in the times when there wasn't a this there was just a concept. And I really, I can't thank people enough for their belief in LLS, to help fund that before there was a there. Now we've got a there, so I'm hoping we'll be able to raise those funds with people who don't have the same amount of foresight as the folks who've been supporting us, and that can see something tangible that we're doing now.
Thank you, Gwen. Back to science and medicine for the last question. So the last question that's in the Q&A, are you planning, it really has to do with therapy selection in the trial. Are you planning to incorporate other types of biomarkers for therapy selection, in particular in the functional precision testing space? So I think we have another professional on the line there.
Yeah, it's a great question. We in the screening trial right now, we've prioritized getting rapid flow results, flow cytometry results, which will quantify the amount of leukemia that's in the bone marrow, and sequencing data back to the sites. And we've focused on returning results to the sites because some of these tests aren't available everywhere in the country, and these are critical in understanding how to treat the leukemia. But because of state-based payer relationships or institutional resources, not every kid everywhere has access to this testing. So we have prioritized the 2 tests that we think are critical for patient care. But they also tell us a lot about immunotherapy targets. That's where we get our flow cytometry, and as well as molecular targets through the sequencing. We have not yet layered on top of that a panel that would look at either dependencies on specific pathways or in vitro drug testing, in vitro combination testing, whatever it might be. And primarily because we don't have a drug yet that would benefit from that type of testing. We do have the sample processing sophistication that we could incorporate that at any point, right? So we can, we're getting live cell assays, we're getting DNA and RNA assays, and we would have the ability to do more advanced testing if indicated by the drug or the company.
Great.
Well, I want to wrap up now and thank everyone who's participated today. Seth, thank you so much for taking the time. I know how busy you are because I'm keeping you busy, I know. and Andy, of course, and Lou. Lou, I want to take a minute to thank you specifically because when I brought this concept to you, and said, this is going to be $100 million. And I didn't think it was going to be 175, but it's going to be a really big project. Your faith that we could do this, and we could move LLS to an international platform from what you've done with BEAT-AML, has meant the world to me. I know it means the world to Andy, and it is your vision and your willingness and your trust that has allowed this to thrive and to be where we are today. And you should, I hope, as you move on to all kinds of good things after LLS, that you will look back at this and be really proud of the leadership that you've shown, and that you are the reason it was possible to do. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Gwen. It's, as you know, it's been a true team effort. And by team, I mean a very expansive team. You know, not only the medical professionals, but our staff, our fundraising team, the tremendous number of volunteers around the organization who have really partnered together to make this possible. So thank you. I think this is the kind of thing that an organization like LLS can aspire to and should aspire to. And I'm glad we are where we are. As you said, it's a reality today. Children are being treated. It's fantastic. So thank you for that. And with that, I see Julie Guillot here.
Yes, I'm always kind of butting in. But they invited me on to also thank you on behalf of our childhood cancer, pediatric AML, pediatric leukemia families. I wanted to thank you personally again for your vision around the Dare to Dream Children's Initiative. And, it's not easy sometimes to take on these large initiatives. It's really stressful. And you're open to criticism. And but I really just want to thank you for your vision and your leadership, and for listening. And I think Andy would say the same thing. We just kind of parachuted in on you one day after you launched BEAT-AML, because we were like, whoa, we need BEAT-AML in kids. And you didn't have to meet with us. You didn't have to listen. And but you did. And I think that's the mark of an exceptional leader, is to listen and entertain outside ideas. And, I know that you say the advocacy, launching the advocacy arm was your crown jewel initiative at the LLS, but I hope that you will look back and maybe change your mind that Dare to Dream was your biggest accomplishment and legacy. So thank you. I'm giving you a hug and I'm doing it for all the families. Thank you.
Well, right back at you, Julie. Thank you so much for staying on this and making all of us see the light here. It's been great. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank the panelists for all of their efforts today, and we'll bring the call to a close. Thank you all. Have a good day.